final exam, oops, it's going to include the urinary system, endocrine, and reproductive. And reproductive, it's both male and female. The final exam is 100 questions. So 100 points is worth 20% of your grade. And you can think of it as 2 exams. The first 50 questions are going to be on all the old materials. So essentially everything from exam 1, 2, and 3. And these are all going to be multiple choice questions. So the first 50 is going to be on exam 1, 2, and 3. So that's about 10, 15 chapters. So I divide them evenly amongst the 50 questions that I have. So you'll probably only see about 2 to 3 questions per chapter. Okay? So 2 to 3 questions per chapter of the old materials. Where the other portion is 50 questions as well. And this is all on the new chapters. In other words, the urinary, endocrine, and reproductive. So think of it as an exam 4. Of those 50 questions, 40 of them are going to be multiple choice. 10 will be fill in the blanks. So what you're used to. Okay. So essentially, the final lecture exam is what you're used to with the 1/2 of it. So 50 questions on urinary. So of those 4 chapters, there's going to be about 10 to 12 questions per chapter. So these questions are going to be a lot more detailed than these questions on the old materials. So my suggestion would be to focus on the new materials and then review the old materials as you go through. Okay, questions on the final lecture exam?
I do have a question.
Mhm.
For the first 50 questions, do they start from the first chapter on, or are they all like just mixed in randomly?
No, they are grouped together. So the first like 2 to 3 questions will be on intro, then the next will be on chem, then will be cells. Because we
Okay.
figured it's already very difficult as it is. We don't need to give you more anxiety by mixing all the questions together.
Okay, thank you.
Someone else had a question?
I was going to ask the same question.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah.
Other questions?
So the 10 fill in the blank are on the urinary, endocrine, and reproductive systems. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And don't forget that repro is actually 2, right? Male and female. Other questions? Okay. Then so this was for the lecture. Then for the lab exam, we'll have 50 questions total, of which about 25 are on the old materials. So if you struggled mightily on the muscles, for example, you will only see about 2 to 3 questions on muscles. Where about 25 will be on the new materials. Like the urinary, male and female reproductive. Okay, and all of these are, you type them in. Spelling counts. Okay. Questions on the lab exam?
Would that be the same as the lecture as an order?
Mm-hmm. Yep, they should be in order. Yep. Other questions? So you have 100 minutes on this one. And I think 75 minutes on this one. Make sure you are doing a very thorough environmental scan. You know, lockdown is always required, but it's the environmental scan that is really important for this final. What else? Lockdown. Yeah. And same thing, you don't have, the date ranges that they're open is a little different from your previous 3 exams. It's actually going to be open from Friday to Sunday. So, and that's because the last day of class is Sunday. So please, please, please do not try to take it on Monday because it won't be available. Okay, so the final exam is open from Friday to Sunday. Any questions about the logistics of the final exam? Okay. So today we're going to be focusing on the urinary system and a little bit of the endocrine system. In the urinary system, you want to make sure that you know you're able to list and describe the functions of the kidney, which include filtering blood. And that includes 2 parts. The filtering blood includes not only cleaning the blood, but also removing the waste and returning. The cleaned products. The analogy that I like to make of the kidney is like it's like a washing machine. You know, you have your machine, you throw your clothes in there. That's your clothes, all stained. You expect it to remove the stain from the clothes. And then the stain, the dirt gets removed, but the shirt is returned to you. So that's what filtering is like. So the blood goes in, it separates the stuff that you don't need from the stuff that you do need. The stuff that you don't need moves onward and then excreted out of your body. The stuff that you do need has to be put back into your body. Okay, so that's filtering blood. So your kidney really is kind of like a washing machine. Okay. In addition to that, it's going to regulate water volumes and regulate pH. Okay. And through regulating water volumes and pH, you can also say that it regulates blood pressure. And many other volumes in your body. Okay. Questions on the urinary system overall? Then you should be able to describe the gross anatomy of a kidney. Someone remind me what a gross anatomy is.
Like the structure?
Mm-hmm. But what about the structure? What does gross mean?
Big.
So gross means things that you can see with your eye, right? So it's visible. So these are the structures that you can see. So if we were in person, I would, in class, I would take a kidney and I would cut in half and show you all the things that you could see, which includes the fibrous capsule, the hilum, which is not an actual structure, but a space that things exit and enter. Then the renal cortex, the renal medulla, and the renal pelvis. So these are all things that you will be able to see with your eyes without a microscope. What you're not able to see with your eye or the microscopic anatomy of a kidney would be the nephron. Now, the nephron, not only is it microscopic, but it's also the functional unit of a kidney. It's what makes the kidney work. So when we get to the nephron, you'll want to know what role does it play in the renal corpuscle? Excuse me. How does it relate to the renal tubules? By becoming the PCT, the nephron loop, and the DCT, and then finally becoming the collecting duct. As you go through the structures, you want to know its function and the tissue lining. And again, you can memorize it, but if you learn it in a way where it makes sense, the reason why it's lined the way it is, that would be better. Okay. And then describe the process of urine formation. So urine formation has 3 to 4 steps, depending on what book you look at. What are the steps?
The glomerular filtrate, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion.
Excellent. I love your answers. Glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. And then some books add a 4th, which is water conservation. That's probably the biggest item in this unit in terms of like understanding the physiology of how things work. Then we talk about the other organs of the urinary system, which include the ureters. You do have 2 of them. And that's why in lab, you have to indicate right or left. You have 1 urinary bladder and you have 1 urethra. For each of these 3, make sure you know the structure, the function, excuse me, and the layers. And then the last thing is to be able to describe the micturition reflex. In other words, how do you urinate? Okay. So I have a request for pathway of urine, so I'll go through that. Excuse me. Can someone lead this and identify what number 1? Go through this for me.
The adrenal gland, or I guess that would be the left adrenal gland.
Number 2.
Left kidney.
The left kidney.
Number 3.
The left ureter.
Ear.
4.
The urinary bladder.
5.
Urethra.
Yep, urethra is correct. Number 9.
The right renal artery.
Yes.
Yep. Number 8.
The right renal vein.
vein.
Great. Number 7 and 6 you don't need to know, but it's the abdominal aorta. Sorry. Okay. Thank you for that. So now this next one is the nephron. Can someone list off the parts of a nephron?
So you have, I guess I'll just start from the beginning. You have the afferent arteriole going into the glomerular that's surrounded by the glomerular capsule. And then you get into the proximal convoluted tubule, the descending limb of the loop, ascending limb of the loop, distal convoluted tubule that dumps into the collecting duct.
Great. So the nephron is everything in the yellow. It starts off with this portion right here. Which is what's number one?
Glomerulus capsule.
Capsule.
Perfect. I love hearing that. Glomerular capsule. Okay. So the glomerular capsule is the first part of the nephron. Now the glomerular capsule has an inner, let me see if I can zoom in. No. Has an outer layer and an inner layer.
Outer layer.
So it's got the parietal and the visceral. The one that we care about is the parietal. So you'll find what tissue lines the glomerular capsule.
Connective tissue.
Not connective.
Epithelial.
Yep. What kind of epithelial?
Is it just simple squamous?
It's not squamous as much as it is simple what?
Simple.
Cuboidal?
Yeah. And in particular, so that's the tissue, right? So the tissue that lines the glomerular capsule is the simple cuboidal epithelium. And the cell that you find making up that simple cuboidal epithelium is what? Podocytes. Okay, so the podocytes that form the simple cuboidal epithelium that make up the glomerular capsule, the reason why they're called podocytes because they look like feet. So there's like there's these extensions off of them. Okay, and these extensions off of them, these dendrites, they form what's called the filtration slits. So here's two podocytes and then the dendrites coming off of them. And then the space between kind of like the toes, those are called filtration slits. Okay, and that's important, especially when we get to the filtration membrane in a little bit. So you should know that the glomerular capsule is formed by simple cuboidal epithelium, which consists of podocytes. Those are the cells that make up the tissue. And then the structure of the podocytes form the filtration slits. Okay, so the glomerular capsule is the first part, and that's the tissue that lines them. Then from there, everything onward is referred to as the renal tubules. And the renal tubules has 3 parts. Number 2, right here. Number 3, right here. And number 4, right here. And then we have the last part, which is number 5. Okay, but the renal tubules is number 2, 3, and 4. So let's start with number 2. What's number 2?
PCT,
Yep. What does that stand for?
proximal convoluted tubules.
Yes. Okay, and what is the proximal convoluted tubules lined with?
Would this one be the simple squamous because of like the diffusion going back and forth?
No, ma'am. But good guess. It is simple, because you're right, things are still moving back and forth, so you don't want to be striated. It is simple, but what is it with?
Well, if it's not simple squamous, then it has to be simple cuboidal.
That's right. And these simple cuboidal are very specialized cells. They have microvilli. Where have you heard of microvilli before?
The digestive system.
Yeah. So the microvilli in the digestive system allows for what?
Absorption.
That's right. So the first time you bring nutrients into your body, into the bloodstream, is through the digestive system. And that's why that step is referred to as absorption. This step is the second time that you bring it back into your bloodstream. So we call this reabsorption. And because the proximal convolute tubule contains the simple cuboidal with the microvilli, the majority of reabsorption occurs in the proximal convolute tubule. Okay. So majority of reabsorption occurs here. Why? Because it's lined with simple cuboidal with microvilli, and you know that microvilli allows for absorption. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Then from here, from the proximal convolute tubule, it's going to go down to number 3. And what's number 3?
The nephron loop.
Yes. The nephron loop has 2 parts, 3A, 3B. Okay. Now you can see that 3A and 3B has areas where it's thick and areas where it's thin. So in general, we'll just call it, so we know that 3A is referred to as the descending because it's moving things down. Descending limb. Where 3B, because it's moving things up, is called the ascending limb. That's right. All right. But when we look through the structure, we're going to divide it not by the descending and ascending limb, but whether it's the thick segment or the thin segment. Okay. So we'll start with the thick segment. The thick segment of the nephron loop is going to be lined with what? Simple what?
Cuboidal as well.
Yes. It is lined with simple cuboidal. But at this moment in time, there are less microvilli. So there's less reabsorption occurring here. Okay, and less things being able to move through. All right. Then in the thin segment, I think it was Abby. Now, Abby, you can say it. What is it lined with?
Simple squamous.
Yes.
I knew
And
it was in
it's-
there somewhere.
It is, absolutely. So simple squamous. And it is because it makes sense that it's thin, right? So that's why it's lined with simple squamous. Now with the simple squamous, there is no microvilli.
I
And
saw
that's
it
gonna,
somewhere. I don't know why. I read some. I read some information, but I don't know why they say it's a simple squamous. I accept, but I don't know why.
you don't know why that it's
It's
simple
a simple.
squamous?
Yes, but I saw it
So
somewhere. I read it.
you see how thin it is? So structurally, if it was squamous, it would be thicker. So it's just a shape thing. You know, what shape fits what tissue type fits this shape the most? And that would be simple squamous. Now, it's going to make sense later on when we add a layer on top of this in terms of what your information looks like. So you'll find that in the thin segment, the only thing that's moving back and forth is water. When the thick segment of the nephron loop, even though it doesn't have microvilli, it's still pulling more of the solutes back and forth. Okay, so it'll start to make more sense once we layer more information on top of it. But for now, the reason why one's simple cuboidal where one's simple squamous is just because of the shape. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank
So
you.
that's the nephron loop. Then it's going to continue to number 4. And what's number 4?
Distal.
Yep. Distal convoluted
Convoluted.
tubules. Perfect. So you can see one is proximal because it's closest. Excuse me. So this one is proximal because it's closest to the glomerular capsule, where this one right here is distal because it's further away. And that's how you can always tell which one's proximal, which one's distal, is if you just follow along because it's always one tube, okay? So the distal, and it's called convoluted because it's not straight, it's curved. Tubule because it's a tube. So distal convoluted tubule is going to be lined with what? What makes sense?
Simple squamous.
Squamous? Does it look
Yeah.
thin like this, like the thin areas?
It's going to be
Simple
simple
cuboidal.
cuboidal, but there's no microvilli, right?
Perfect.
Yeah.
So simple cuboidal with no microvilli. So what I was comparing is this portion right here. Is it similar to this portion or is it similar to this portion? 1 or 2?
To 2.
Yeah, and that's why 2 is lined with simple cuboidal. So that's why number 4 is also lined with simple cuboidal.
Mhm.
Okay? So that's why it's simple cuboidal. And by the time it gets to the distal convoluted tubule, there's no more microvilli, which tells you what about its function.
It's no longer reabsorbing.
That's right. It's still reabsorbing, but very limited. Okay, so limited reabsorption. All right, and then finally you get to the 5th structure, which is this thing right here, and that's the collecting duct. Now, some books do not consider that as part of the nephron. Like yours. Okay, so your textbook does not include the collecting duct as part of the nephron. Questions? All right. So, yep, go ahead.
Question real fast. So most of the
Mhm.
reabsorption is in the PCT. Isn't most of the secretion in the DCT?
No, ma'am. So
Where is
secretion,
the secretion?
yep, secretion occurs along the entire renal tubules.
Okay.
Yep. Reabsorption occurs along the entire renal tubules as well.
Just majority of it is in the PCT.
Correct. Let me show
Okay.
you a picture of that. There's a beautiful picture in your textbook that looks like this. And that shows you what materials are moving from where to where. So you can see that the blue boxes show you reabsorption, where the pink boxes show you secretion. Take a minute to
Okay.
look at that.
And that's why over in the ascending limb, I mean, there's sodium throughout this, but that's why there's a lot of water reabsorption happening in the descending limb because of the sodium movement, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So my question to all of you, why do we have reabsorption and why do we have secretion?
Well, the
Back
sorry.
and we have to put it back. We take things, but our body might need it, so we take it back. We put it back.
Okay. Yep. And which process is that?
The reabsorption.
Correct. So why do you need secretion?
Because isn't it in the glomerular like capsule, some of the things can't be filtered out because of how big it is. So that's when it comes down in there and then it's like secreted back in, right?
Nope. Because
Oh.
actually it's actually the filtration in the renal capsule, whatever is filtered is whatever is also what can be secreted. And you'll notice that what is being secreted is actually a lot more limited. You see the things in the pink, tubular secretion, very limited and smaller items. So why do we have secretion? Why can't we just filtrate it at the glomerular capsule?
It's all part of regulating our homeostasis.
Yes. How so?
All that stuff there is about, looks like regulating pH balance.
Yep. pH is a huge thing that's being regulated here. Yep. Yep. What else? So let's say, for example, you've just filtered 5 gallons of water, right? But then you realize that you drank more water even. So does that mean that your body has to wait until it circulates all the way through your body back to your kidneys again? Or is there a way for like a last minute attempt to get rid of the excess water?
So like an emergency overflow valve.
Isn't there
Yeah.
last minute?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So remember how I said like your kidney is like a washing machine? You know, sometimes I have all the clothes in the washing machine and then I realize, oh shoot, there's a sock that's I didn't see. And then I throw it in last minute. That's secretion. Okay. So secretion allows me to throw things out. So in other words, it's going to be urinated, right? Without having to wait until my next batch of laundry. Does that make sense? So filtration is when I'm doing the batch of laundry. Reabsorption is when once it's clean, I take back the clothes and I dry my clothes and I fold them. Secretion is when, oh no, I realize I have one sock I forgot to throw in and I throw it in last minute without having to wait until the next batch of laundry. In other words, without having to wait until it goes through filtration again. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
So that's the difference between reabsorption versus secretion versus filtration. Okay. And Audrey, you're absolutely right. It's because pH is such a delicate balance and blood pressure is such a delicate, level, very narrow range that your body can tolerate. You have to have a way to be able to get rid of the excess hydrogen or excess water right away instead of having to wait until it circulates throughout your whole body and then gets back to the kidney again. All right. Let's go back to our picture right here. So that's the first layer of information, is just knowing what things are. So the nephron consists of the glomerular capsule, the PCT, the nephron loop, and the DCT, and then the collecting duct. So we're going to add another layer to that. which is now the blood vessels. Okay, so you have all of that going on, but now you have the blood vessels on top of that. Now the blood vessels look something like this. Here is the only time that the blood, well, not the only time, but one of the times, one of the two times where it deviates from what we learned about in the cardiovascular system. In the cardiovascular system, we learned that from the heart, it becomes the what?
An
Veins
artery?
go-
Mhm. From the artery, it becomes what?
Vein,
Not yet.
artery,
Capillaries. From the capillaries, it goes back to the heart through veins, right? And it repeats that cycle. So it's from an artery to capillary to vein. But here, very rarely, it happens twice in the renal and hepatic portals, where it goes from artery to capillary, back to being an artery, to being a capillary, and then a vein. So here is a unique exception to how it usually goes from an artery to capillary to a vein. Okay, so let's start from here. What brings the blood into the kidney?
The afferent arteriole.
Before that, man.
Oh, your renal artery.
Yes. So it starts off as the renal artery, and that's what goes into the kidney. Now it transitions further, like through multiple changes, but we don't require you to know that. We just require you to the point where it goes into the nephron. So, like Abby said, it is the afferent arteriole. And a good way to remember that is I use A in afferent for A in arriving. So afferent arteriole is a smaller artery that's arriving at the nephron. At this point, it's going to become a ball of capillaries right here. And what's number 3? Ball of capillary. What's number 3?
glomerulus,
Glomerulus. Excuse me. Glomerulus. And now here's where it's weird, right? Because the glomerulus is capillaries. And instead of going from a artery to capillary to a vein, it becomes what again? What's number 4? Not a vein. It becomes the efferent arteriole. So it goes back to being kind of a smaller artery. And I remember E in efferent for E as an exiting. It exits the nephron. Okay. Then number 5 is all of this. And number 5 is the peritubular capillary. Makes sense. Peri meaning around, tubular because it wraps around the tubes, right? And then capillary. And then when it exits, number 6, it exits as the renal what? What does it exit as? The renal veins. Okay? So the blood
If
vessel,
you ask, we have to give you, in case you ask a question about that, we have to give you all by numbers order.
you don't have to memorize by numbers. I never asked you what's the fifth blood vessel or what's the third blood vessel. You do need to know the flow though. So you need to know that it goes from renal artery to afferent arterial to glomerular capsule, to the glomerulus, to the efferent arterial, to the peritubular capillary, to the renal veins. Yes, you do need to know that order
Okay.
and what they are.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So that's the second layer. So the first layer was just to go through what the parts of the nephron was. The second layer is to go through how does the blood vessel interact with the nephron, and here's what it looks like. It starts off as the renal artery, becomes the afferent arterial, then the glomerulus, then the efferent arterial, then the peritubular capillary, and leaves as the renal vein. Questions? Okay. The third layer that we're going to add on is now your information. So now that we have the full picture, we know parts of the nephron, we know what the blood vessels look like. Now this is the third layer. So we're gonna go through your information. Okay. So everyone knows what this picture is, right? So if I pointed to here, what would you tell me this was right here? What is this thing right here?
The descending limb,
Yep, of.
the nephron loop,
And is it the thin or thick segment?
it's the thin.
What is it lined with?
Ah, the thin is squamous. Simple.
Yep,
Simple squamous.
exactly. Yep, perfect. Good job. Okay, if I were to say, tell me what this is. Someone tell me what this is.
Is that the peritubular capillaries?
Excellent. And peritubular capillary is lined with what? This one you have to go back to the chapter on cardiovascular system. So what are capillaries lined with in general?
Endothelium and basement.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Okay. So that's the peritubular capillary. All right. So that's essentially what you need to know from the two previous slides that we looked at. So we talked about what parts of the nephron, and then we talked about the blood vessels and how they, how they move through. So now we're going to look at your information. In other words, how do these two interact with each other? So in your information, you have 4 main steps. 1, glomerular filtration. 2, tubular reabsorption. And it's not that tubular reabsorption happens first or tubular secretion happens first. They both happen at the same time, essentially. But we just number them as 3. Okay, and as in, like, it's another event that happens in the tubes. So you have tubular reabsorption, tubular secretion, and then you have water conservation. Okay, let's start with glomerular filtration. So in number 1, glomerular filtration, where does it occur?
The capsule, the glomerular capsule.
Yep. So your information is a movement of fluids. So whenever you're telling me about movement of fluids, you gotta tell me where it was before, where does it go? So tell me where it was before, where does it go? Where was the fluid before?
Like the blood that's coming in from the renal artery.
Renal artery is all the way down here. So it's not going to be the renal artery, but it's going to come from where?
The afferent arteriole.
The afferent arteriole is going to be right here. So it's not connected to the nephron yet. I know someone's got it.
Can you ask the question again?
Yep. So in glomerular filtration, where was the fluid and where does it go?
I mean, it was in the glomerulus.
That's what I'm looking for, the glomerulus.
Okay. Yeah, that's how you say it.
So it went from the glomerulus, where it was what type of fluid? What do you call the fluid in the glomerulus?
Filtrate. No.
Not filtrate.
Mm.
It's just blood, right?
Plasma?
Plasma is the correct answer. Blood is okay answer because blood is everything. But the only thing that gets filtered is actually the fluids. So things like red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets should not move through. And if it does, if you find blood in your urine, that's a bad sign. Okay, so only the fluid things should be able to pass, and that would be the plasma. And it's going to go from the glomerulus to where?
It gets out, it kind of leaks into the capsule, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Be confident. Glomerular capsule. And that's where you see these green lines right here, these green arrows. Do you see these green arrows pointing how it goes from the glomerulus into the glomerular capsule? Once it gets into the glomerular capsule, what do we call that fluid?
We now call it filtrate.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Now, because the structure between the glomerulus and glomerular capsule, you can think of it like a baseball mitt holding a baseball. The baseball is the network of capillaries, the glomerulus, and the baseball mitt is the glomerular capsule. Okay. So because they're so closely together, and actually one covers the other, in general, we call these two structures together what? What's the name for these two structures together? We call it the renal corpuscle. So the renal corpuscle includes the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule. Excuse me. All right. So filtration happens when the fluid is moving from the glomerulus into the glomerular capsule. In other words, it was plasma, it's now filtrate. What drives this? What drives this process? What drives the movement of the fluid from the glomerulus into the glomerular capsule?
Are you asking like the pressure?
Mm-hmm. Driven by blood pressure. Okay, and that's why blood pressure is important, because if your blood pressure is too high, you're going to find that you urinate a lot more. If your blood pressure is too low, you're going to find that you don't urinate enough. Okay, so blood pressure influences urine input and output. Okay, well, urine output actually. All right. In addition to that, you want to make sure you know what GFR is. What's GFR? What's GFR? Come on, I know someone knows. Glomerular filtrate rate. Okay, so glomerular filtrate rate is how much fluid are you pushing through, okay, from the glomerulus to the glomerular capsule. On average, it's about 150 to 180 liters per day. Okay, so this is what's being filtered. And it's usually measured by milliliters per minute by both kidneys. Okay, now, how many of you urinate 150 to 180 liters per day? No one, right? We'd be in trouble if that was the case. So that's why reabsorption is really crucial to being able to bring back what we need into the body. Okay, so make sure you know glomerular filtrate rate, what's being filtered, what substance is being filtered, what substance should not be filtered, for example, red blood cells. Okay, now as it moves on, as the fluid moves, as the filtrate moves through the proximal convoluted tubule, you'll find that the majority of tubular reabsorption happens here. That's where you take the materials back. Okay, then as it moves down, now to take the materials back, this process requires what? To take the substance. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Fusion?
It doesn't happen through diffusion, actually. What's the opposite of diffusion?
I saw some, you needed ATP, right?
Yes. So it requires ATP. So it is an active transport. And that's why the simple cuboidal epithelium that lines the proximal convoluted tubule is going to have lots of mitochondria because it needs ATP to be able to push things back. Okay? Versus when you move down to the nephron loop, in the nephron loop, there's less mitochondria. So how are things being moved in the nephron loop?
That one is diffusion?
Yep. So, well, it's a movement of water. So water is going to move through what?
Osmosis?
Yes. Okay. And then you'll have the salts being moved, and the salts pull each other along. So if you have diffusion of the sodium, sodium is going to pull what with it? Chloride. Okay. So movement of salts, you'll pull the sodium and sodium will pull the chloride. And if the salts move, you pull the water along as well. And when the water is pulled along, it's through osmosis. Okay. All right. Then you have tubular secretion. Tubular secretion we talked about earlier. So in other words, any last minute items that you don't want to have to circulate throughout the whole body and go through this whole process again can be removed from the blood vessel into the nephron through the process of tubular secretion. Okay, and by the time that things get to the collecting duct, at this point, it's referred to as urine. Okay. Although there is still some limited reabsorption happening there, mostly of just water, it does still happen. But at this point, really things are called urine. Okay. Now the collecting duct is actually what forms the renal pyramids. So we were to follow urine. Okay, it starts out as filtrate in the glomerular capsule, moves through the PCT, the nephron loop, the DCT, the collecting duct. From the collecting duct, it will join up with the minor calyx to the major calyxes, to the renal pelvis, to the ureter, to the urinary bladder, urethra, and then out to a toilet, hopefully. Okay, so one of your classmates asked about pathways. That's the pathway. All right. So here's this is a really nice image. It's figure 23.22 in your textbook. It does a really beautiful job of going through what's being absorbed versus what's being secreted. Okay. So now this slide right here is taking a look at the filtration membrane. In other words, between the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule. You can see that the glomerulus is essentially it's a capillary. And I think it was Erica that told us that capillaries are lined with endothelium. And the endothelium of a glomerulus is specialized because it has these little holes in them. So it's referred to as fenestrated. So things are able to move through the fenestrations of the endothelium of the capillary through a basement membrane. So that's a second membrane. The first one is the endothelium, then the fenestrated endothelium of the capillary. Then you have the basement membrane, and then you have the podocytes, the filtration slits of the podocytes, which we talked about earlier, belonging to the glomerular capsule. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense now that we've gone through the nephron and the blood vessels. Questions on this one?
So you are going back to the previous slide. You said that for tubular absorption, it requires ATP for active transport, correct?
Yep.
So is that the same for tubular secretion?
Tubular secretion, yes. So tubular secretion will also need ATP to be able to dump it in.
Gotcha. And then I think, well, on your slide, it says number 4, another reabsorption. Is that correct?
Number 4
Does that, yes. Oh,
of this slide?
yes, in this slide. You
Yeah,
kind of
water conservation.
water conservation, yes. So for that one, is that also using ATP or is it down to osmosis?
Osmosis.
Okay, okay. And how can you tell where the efferent arteriole begins and ends?
So when it leaves the glomerular capsule, that's where it begins.
Okay,
And then when it starts to wrap around the tubular, the PCT, that's where it ends.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Great questions. All right. So we are over time a little bit, but I just want to briefly go through the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is a lot less physiology, but a lot of memorization because you essentially need to know what hormones do what and where they're secreted and their actions. Okay. So for example, So you need to know three main things: where they're secreted / produced, what's their target, and what's their action. So for example, in the anterior pituitary gland, that's where they're secreted, and in most cases where they're produced. The growth hormone targets various cells, and its action is to stimulate growth. And the growth it stimulates can be numbers or size. Okay. Luteinizing hormone, for example, targets the sex organs. In females, it leads to ovulation. In males, it leads to testosterone secretion. So you can see that for each of these, you should know where they're secreted, produced, what's their target, and what's their action. So I would actually suggest making a long list of them. Okay, questions on those? All right.